Thank you for joining us today. A bit of a scary topic. Hopefully we'll make it less scary in terms of the content. It is a workshop, so if you can take away two things, if we talk again today, I'll ask you kind of two takeaways, because I think these things are workshops, you should be able to take something away. So we've given you a lot of examples, there's some really good stats in there, and this session should be useful for you guys to think about how you could take this into your own real world. Very quickly, I'm from a company called Branch. It's a company that most people haven't heard of. We're kind of one of the newcomers, but in this region, we work with 70% of the top 200 apps in the world. So you probably use us on a daily basis without even knowing it. We're very much a deep linking company. We moved into mobile attribution space. That's enough about me. That's the end of the sales pitch. That's my face. That's Andy's face. I'll let him introduce himself, and we'll take it from there.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andy. I'm from a company called Feature, which I'm going to introduce in a bit. I've been in mobile around 20 years, so I'm kind of a dinosaur at this point. And yeah, really happy to be here and sharing the stage with Ian. So yeah, really quickly about Feature. Yeah, we won some awards, blah, blah, blah. We're a mobile growth agency / consultancy. We work with B2C apps that are looking to get a bit more systematic about some of their kind of key growth challenges. Things like App Store optimization, so organic and paid acquisition, engagement retention, subscription revenue optimization, data analytics, creative design support, this kind of stuff. We're working with some of these brands here. Also HBO Max, it's not on that list yet, but that's a recent addition. That's who we are. Oh, sorry.
I'm driving.
We got yeah, two clickers here. So.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
We'll sort this out. The dynamic, it'll work. So what does a downturn mean for marketing? We'll try to give you as many stats as possible around this and try and keep it less subjective. I look after a branch across Middle East, Europe, so I travel a lot, and this is my 8th country in about 5 weeks. I speak to a lot of companies, and the kind of top line thing that I'm hearing from brands from Middle East, Saudi, all the way through to the US has been, yeah, we need to do the same as last year with 20% less. And you're probably hearing that in your organizations as well, because I think it's very much common. So when you look at actually the stats around that, this is the change in digital advertising spend from 21 to 24. It's not as scary as it looks, because you came off COVID year where everyone was spending online because there was nothing else to spend on. But there is a downturn from 23 to 24, and that's where you're probably seeing the recession taking a hold. And depends who you talk to, some countries in recession, some countries are about to enter recession. In Europe, we've got a lot of different factors that are converging at once. So for the next few minutes, we're going to actually just talk, well, for the next 40 minutes, we're going to talk about what tactics can we use as marketers to offset the challenges we're going to see in the market. So looking back at the last recession, it was a very different recession. This is going back to 1999. It was a very different recession. It was led by a financial crash rather than what we're seeing in the market today. But I think sort of takeaways we can learn from that recession. So this was across 1,000 companies across the Western world. And they looked at Group 1 increased their spend, Group 2 flat spend, and Group 3 decreased. They looked at, again, post-recession 3 years later and saw how these companies did. So on average, the ones that increased spend during recession increased their market share by 4.3%. And that's, if you look at the macroeconomics of it, that's a huge percentage increase in that period, where the flat group was more or less flat or slightly increased, and the Group 3 had an 8% decrease in market share. So when you look at kind of stats like that, everyone thinks about cutting budgets, that's what we need to do. But it's not all about cutting budgets. What the thing we need to look at is, it's more about refocusing your investment on the things that work. And we all have this in the I have this in my day-to-day life. You get bogged down doing low-value work, whether you could be refocusing on high-value work and the few things that actually move the needle rather than the many things that don't move the needle. I think every organization is very guilty of that, and that's where politics and companies comes into play. So these are the four topics we're going to talk about. Now that we've gone through our intro. Doubling down on ROI, rethinking segmentations and incentives, focusing on customer experience, and then measuring and leveraging first-party channels, how the organic side can really drive from there.
Great, yeah, and in terms of the split, like, Ian's done, I think, a great job of sort of setting the sort of macro context. I'm going to try and throw in plenty of like real-world examples from apps that we've worked with at Feature or previously from my experience at SoundCloud. So that's approximately how we're going to dice it up. But yeah, so like we think about like measuring ROI. Now, if any of you were in the previous session with Thomas Petit, you'll know, yeah, he's very clear that, like, and I completely agree, that it's getting harder and harder to measure stuff. It's, there's more inference needed, more, measurement is getting, more challenging and is less precise, right? But, if you're just looking at paid versus organic, and again, Thomas would say, like, there's no such thing as organic, it's really about like what can you actually attribute, right? Another great quote, Peter Drucker, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. That's absolutely the case, right? So like, even if measurement is not always 100% precise, you want to be able to understand as best you can, like where your users are coming from and which of your initiatives and channels are working best for you. And yeah, for sure, Branch with link tracking, if you're actually creating your own links, that provides a lot better visibility and precision on a lot of these kind of, what would otherwise be kind of unattributed channels. Yeah, so Branch has like run some surveys and data, got a bunch of data on this. They see that owned channels, first-party channels, albeit with lower reach, are performing typically, like in terms of ROI, way better than ads. Obviously, your mileage may vary. This is like, sort of category specific. Also depends on how well you're executing on your own channels. But suffice to say, like your blended CAC, customer acquisition cost, you can probably bring it down by, investing in these own channels as well. And looking also like, not just at your like cost per install, but also at your longer term, metrics like retention, engagement, monetization. Yeah, and just on that note, sort of thinking about like, I think, yeah, Tom also mentioned web to app, and I think also in the previous session, which I wasn't able to attend, I heard Jakob Chur was also talking a lot about kind of web to app and how that's kind of on the rise as a, something that's really becoming more relevant in terms of a sort of an acquisition play. We also see this a lot at Feature. We're working with a lot of brands who are starting to ask the question, where should we be acquiring customers and where should we be onboarding them? If we're trying to acquire a subscriber, should we be getting that subscription on web, partially to avoid the Apple tax, but also maybe because they can, drive more traffic there, and then get that user to install the mobile app, and how do we get them across to mobile? Or should we be trying to acquire them directly on mobile? These are like interesting questions. Again, also comes down to measurement. What is pretty clear and what I see all the time is like long-term, native mobile is like way stickier and typically way better at like kind of keeping users around and monetizing them over the long term. Where you acquire that user and which flows, or whether you do a mixture of like acquiring users directly on native mobile and through web flows, that's up to you and definitely worth experimenting with. But I would say definitely worth ultimately trying to get them into the app, because that's where we almost always see them more sticky.
Right, looking at topic 2, how we rethink our segmentations and incentives as part of this. So during a recession, if you look at the segmentation, it's probably not your typical segmentation strategy you may have or have seen before. So this is a recession segmentation strategy. So you can break it down into these 4 groups. These are the people who are going to slam on the brakes. You then have pained but patient, comfortably well off, and live for today. So slammed on the brakes is probably one of your biggest groups. It's probably the lower end of the socio-demographic society. Pained but patient, this is very much the middle class who can ride out, but they probably get cut back on a few things. Comfortably well off, these are people in the top 5%, It could be pensioners who see interest rates rising and are very much not really worried about it. And then you have the live for today. These are the urban 20-somethings who don't really care about a recession. It's not going to change my life. I'm going to continue spending the same way I've spent before. So generally, things can be broken down into that. But then also, the second layer, they also break it down by product category. What are the essentials that someone has to have? And these are things that we can't do without. Postponables that you have. Treats. Do these things decrease? Or expendables, like travel. Do people cut down on travel during economic recessions? You see the answer is yes, because you can see from the previous recessions. So depending on which market you're in, you can start looking at verticals like this and deciding, right, how do we segment our audience to really use our ad spend effectively in the future, and maybe targeting groups that we know aren't going to buy is just wasted money. So looking at this as a group, and I've only got one segment here. We have got a number of these slides. It would be death by PowerPoint if I took you through each part of this deck. So afterwards, there's a QR code at the last slide where you can scan and get all the slides. But taking you through this one, so basically what we've done is broken down this into essential treats, postponables, expendables, and then behavior. What's going to change? What are they looking to do? What are the macroeconomics they're thinking about? And this should be a guide that you guys can use in your own world, start seeing, right, how does my organization look at these buckets, and how are going to segment above and beyond our segmentation strategies at the moment? So it's just another level to do that. The marketer job is never done. I want to give you some real-world examples. I think we promised that in the past, and I think we've got a lot of real-world examples in here. So offering incentives with smart banners and emails. So this is KFC, one of our customers. And one thing they did really well is how can you incentivize, but also make it really simple? You know, we've got that. We live in the 3-second economy. It doesn't work within 3 seconds. I'm out. If something's broken and it goes somewhere where it's not going to work, I'm out. So it was 10 for 10. 10 tenders for $10. This was obviously a US campaign. It went straight into a preloaded cart within the app. And that preloaded, obviously deep linked in, preloaded cart was then preserved. So within 3 clicks, you could have your product arriving, which had a really successful campaign for them. The second one is another food company we work with, Burger King. And what they've also looked at is segmenting based on usage. So they filtered users who have not used the app in 90 days and add additional discounts to this. They also then had the same campaign that they launched through ad spend, I think, on Twitter as well, when they launched this, as you see, the Twitter ad. This was really specifically at those user groups who had the app.
Yeah, and on the subject of incentivization, you know, if you've got a subscription app, you particularly in a recession, we're not sure how long this is going to last, but like, you know, most indications are that, like, you know, there's countries that are still sort of entering recession, right? It's probably not going to be over in a couple of quarters. We're looking at probably 1-2 years. So if you're going to incentivize people with a discount on a subscription, probably best to try and lock them in for a longer period, you know, rather than get them on the monthly subscription, try and get them on 12 months, you know, 1-year subscription, you know, then you've got a bit of security on your revenue. So let's move on to point 3, like focusing on customer journeys, right? Just sort of recap, like what do we mean by a customer journey, right? I like this sort of slightly abstract representation here down at the bottom here. It's really about kind of, you know, getting as many people into a cycle of like hopefully like ongoing engagement. You know, you're going to have some users who are lapsing out, but you want to try and get some of those back in. It's about really trying to get as many people into this kind of spin cycle of like ongoing engagement, whatever that means for your particular app or product, right? It's not going to necessarily always be at the same frequency for every category. Like some apps are daily or even multi-times a day usage. Other times that cycle might run a bit slower. It might be like a travel booking app where users are, you know, engaging, but that cycle's going around every, you know, 3-6 months. That's, you know, the natural usage frequency might change, but these general kind of customer journey stages remain, very relevant, I think. So it's like about setting users up for success initially with the onboarding stage, getting them to that aha moment, what we call activation, starting to build that habit loop, that spin cycle in the middle, then running them around that spin cycle at the right cadence. And important again to think about that natural usage frequency, that you're not trying to, often when lifecycle marketing is done badly, it's because there's not a sort of a recognition of like, where is this user in their user journey, and what would be optimal kind of peak usage for this user. Much as we'd all love to have people using our apps 10 times a day, it's not always relevant. So if you're sending push notifications 10 times a day to somebody on a travel app, they're going to deinstall it pretty quickly. So it's like about kind of getting in, into that groove with the natural usage cadence, but like, being relevant and there for the user when they're likely to, to want to or need to engage with the app. Identifying those lapsing users, ideally before they've become dormant, because it's much harder to reactivate them later and can get more expensive. But when they have churned, looking at like resurrecting those users, particularly the payers, right? Like, and I've got an example in a minute of like how Visco did that very effectively. But yeah, I mean, never mind resurrection. Like that's always hard, and it's generally worth working on. But if you're going to start somewhere, definitely start on onboarding and activation. There's usually the most upside there. Even if you've iterated on it a fair bit, there's usually still more upside because you have so many people churning in the early days of the product. A lot of people are not going to stick around for a second session even. So if you can get significantly more of them sticking around and get them into that spin cycle, you're gonna see a lot of sort of compound gains over time with retention. So yeah, I think I kind of already talked a little bit through what onboarding's about. I think that like sometimes there's a kind of a lack of clarity around what is meant by onboarding and what is meant by activation. That they're often used fairly interchangeably. The way that I look at it is, onboarding is this kind of, I think Brian Balfour from Reforge calls it like the setup moment. At the end of the onboarding, the user should totally understand the value prop of the app. I mean, they should be already understanding the value prop, by the way, from the App Store and from any ads. But they should get that message reinforced in the onboarding. They should understand approximately what they need to do in order to experience the value of the app. But they maybe haven't experienced it yet. But there should be any other setup that they need, permissioning, collecting their email address or whatever else you need to do. Maybe also collecting some information from the user. I've got an example from this in a moment. That you can use then to personalize the experience and to increase their retention later. So onboarding is all about setup. Activation is when they're actually experiencing the value of the product for the first time. Now, I have seen onboarding processes that kind of force the user to actually experience that value during onboarding, like Evernote, which I don't have the example here today. They do that very successfully. They actually make the user use all the features as part of the onboarding, and that's great. But you don't have to do it that way. Example I like to use is Fastic. So apologies if you've seen this before. I have reused this slide from a previous presentation. I presented this at a workshop in Vegas earlier this year. And what I didn't know is that the Fastic team were in the audience, including the Tobias, one of the co-founders. But that was great because actually he was able to confirm my suspicion, because they're not a customer feature. So I didn't know what their completion rate was for onboarding. But I assumed it would be pretty high because it's one of the best onboardings that I've seen. It's really playful. This is even better if you actually would see it in the app. I would encourage you to check it out just purely to see what a nice onboarding is like. It's very playful. It's like animated. It's asking a lot of information from the user, right? Like it's giving lots of different kind of ways for the user to input this information. It's not just like a series of, text input boxes, right? It's like lots of different widgets and sliders, and it's very interactive. It's actually quite fun to go through, and it's bloody long. It's like 15 steps or something, right? Which goes against a lot of the conventional wisdom of make your onboarding as short as possible, help get the user straight to the aha moment. Fastic has I can't remember exactly how many steps it is, but it's a lot. And they have an 80% completion rate. So you don't always need to cut out steps from your onboarding. in order to, to get more people through it. You just have to make it really bloody good. Fastic's one example of this. And yeah, Tobias was in the audience, and he's like, yeah, we get 80% of people completing this. And I'm not surprised, actually. But yeah, it's like, I think it's worth just sort of saying, okay, like the user here, it's like they're actually collecting a whole bunch of information which they're already using to personalize the last few steps of the onboarding, right? The paywall. This talk is not about subscription optimization, but it's definitely one of my kind of favorite topics. And personalized paywalls work great. If you can make it seem more relevant for the user, you're going to get a higher conversion rate. And you can see here, it's talking about the goal weight of the user. Reach your goal of 65.2 kilos. That's going to convert way better than just a generic, you can lose weight if you subscribe, right? So that even before the onboarding's finished, it's talking about how it's creating a personal plan for you, it's creating a program. It's showing that it's listened to you, it's got information, it's already going to be customizing and delivering you a more personalized experience, right? So that's the flip side. If you're going to ask for information, you should actually use it to personalize the experience as far as possible, not just to do marketing with it. But if you can do that, you're going to get some great results. Here's another example of personalization from SoundCloud. I used to work at SoundCloud. I set up the retention team there a long time ago, before I set up Feature. It's also where I met my co-founder, Moritz. So Moritz and I, subsequently, we've been working with SoundCloud, helping them with retention because, they wanted to keep working with us, so they brought us back in a few years back. So interestingly enough, they had never really iterated on their onboarding in a long time, and they were, I think, struggling to resource that on the product side. So what we did for them is help them solve the cold start problem. SoundCloud has a really, really great music recommendation machine learning algorithm, right? But just like all machine learning algorithms, it needs some like source data and some input. In this case, about 2 weeks worth of listening before it really gets a handle on your music taste, right? So when users first install SoundCloud, and let me know, Ian, if I need to speed up. We're doing all right for time?
We're right.
Okay, good. When a user launches SoundCloud, they're basically got this empty room problem, which definitely, we see this in a lot of apps. If it's a content app, you need to be able to surface some content in front of them. I think Netflix does a very good job of this. There's never an empty room in Netflix. You might not like the stuff that it's pushing at you, but you're never short of something to watch, right? Whereas SoundCloud was just okay, you can go to the Discover page or you can search for an artist, but it didn't just immediately give you something to listen to. So, and getting someone to listen is that aha moment. So yeah, we said, okay, well, how about we ask the user using a mobile in-app message, which means we don't need to deploy a new version of the app, and we don't need engineering resources for this. We can build this in HTML5 and deploy it through Braze. I think we're using Braze. Anyway, deploy it through a customer engagement platform, collect some information from the user, in this case asking them, what kind of music do you like? And then using that response, firing that back, storing it against the user profile, and then being able to immediately then pull a curated playlist of the genres that they selected to be able to provide, instead of just a generic welcome email, the welcome email that we see on the right, which actually providing them with a listen link to a personalized playlist, they receive 2 minutes after they've signed up. So again, personalization, it's not rocket science that making something more relevant for the user is going to help. But just some practical examples here. And we saw significant increase in engagement overall from these new users, but also a nice increase in monetization as well. So just a little bit more about owned channels, right? So I was at SoundCloud, I was working on retention. Our team put a lot of effort into building out things like email marketing, push notifications, mobile in-app messages like the ones I just showed you. We're also working with Headspace, again, really helping them to leverage these kind of channels. Mobile in-app messages particularly, super, super impactful. But yeah, no shit, right? Because you're basically putting a pop-up in someone's face. So you have to be careful exactly, how and when you use those, but they can be really, really impactful. So with Headspace, we also found that kind of bringing people back into the app with a push notification, which then would link to a mobile in-app message, being able to kind of chain campaigns like this, also super effective. also requires effective deep linking. But yeah, just to kind of illustrate the power of some of these earned channels. This is an example. I'm not going to name the app because I didn't ask them for permission to show their exact stats. So the app will remain nameless, but we see this trend a lot. So at Feature, when we start working with a new retention client, first thing we do is we get a good feel for like what's going on, how effective are the current efforts and the current channels that they're using. What this is showing, and apologies, it's a bit like small text, but the blue line, this is a retention curve. So from day 0 to day 28, so basically 1 month's worth of retention. You can see both curves are flattening out pretty well, which is actually a good shape for a retention curve. But one is significantly higher than the other, and it's actually crazy high. It's kind of like at day 28, it's around about 70-something% or something a little under. Anyway, really great retention. The green line, still not bad retention in this case in terms of the absolute numbers, but it's not really about the absolute numbers. It's more about the differential between these two. So the blue line is people who received at least one push notification. The green line is people like all users. So it's basically just an average. And this is like all users being like new user cohorts. This is a crazy differential. Of course, there's some correlation causation question here, because in order to receive a push notification, they would had to opt it in for push. Okay, so there's a bit of selection bias. However, like even if you sort of subtract the fact that they're probably higher intent users, still we can infer that the push notifications are having a significant increase on retention. And of course, like you can actually run more detailed experiments to see how much each push campaign or whatever is contributing to that. But it's nice to look at the macro and see, actually, yeah, these channels do work. And they're relatively cheap compared to running paid ads, for example. Yeah, I'm going to speed up a little bit because I feel like, how are we doing in time?
10 minutes.
Okay, right. So I mentioned we got an example from Visco. So just another example of owned channels. With Visco, they wanted to look at like subscriber reactivation. So I mentioned earlier, you really want to try to reactivate your paying users, the valuable ones particularly. And yeah, Visco found it was super effective to use mobile in-app messages to just actually remind people that this was not incentivized, that there was no discount or anything offered, but just to say to people, hey, by the way, did you know your subscription's expired? And reminding people at the right points within the app that like maybe they no longer had access to certain premium features that they used to, and saying, hey, yeah, you used to be able to do this, but now your subscription's expired. Maybe you want to renew it? And yeah, almost 25% increase just by reminding people that they had expired. So it's worth trying this stuff.
We've got a lot of macroeconomic data, so we can look at about 100,000 apps and have a look at what's working in these apps. One of the things that, and he will take you through some real-world examples, is using referrals as a retention strategy. So what we found is that when someone's sending a referral to a friend to download an app, actually 30 to 40% of those people have the app already. And that becomes a really powerful reignition point for an app to view. But Andy will actually show you some real-world examples on that. Yeah,
so I mentioned back at SoundCloud, when we set up like a proper data-driven growth team and started to look at this stuff a bit more holistically, and look at attribution data and try to attribute where these users were coming in with a bit more precision, what we saw was exactly what Ian's just said, is that actually like a ton of our existing repeat usage was coming in not from people launching the app and saying, oh, I'm going to listen to SoundCloud today. They were coming in from links, from from search particularly. Like we're pretty good at SEO, so we're getting a lot of like mobile web search, but also from like people sharing links on WhatsApp, Facebook, etc. And actually understanding that better, we actually started to drive even more people, rather than letting them play directly in player widgets on Facebook, we would actually redirect them to mobile web to even kind of to drive this even further. So basically, like people would land on mobile web, where, as we already established, they're not so sticky. So we wanted to get them into the app as soon as possible, and so we used deep linking for that, deferred deep linking, which I think we've got some other examples in a minute. But yeah, was super effective. And this is why in the mobile growth stack, virality is listed as, both in the acquisition and the engagement and retention layer. It's from this learning and this understanding, exactly to Ian's point, that links and referrals can bring a lot of repeat usage. So we got a couple of like tips and best practices to finish up with. Ian's already mentioned like the value of like incentivizing some of these referral links. And yeah, of course, if you can afford to incentivize and to offer some kind of reward to the user for doing a share or an invite, I'm going to make a quick difference. There's you can kind of bulk it all together as referral, but actually I like to delineate it a little bit between like content shares, things like I'm sharing a link on SoundCloud, to a direct invite. But it's usually the invites that are more incentivized because there's sort of usually a more direct correlation with acquiring a customer. But actually content shares can also be pretty valuable for acquiring customers as well. We certainly saw that at SoundCloud. We grew a lot through just, people sharing music around. It's useful to also understand and think about what's the motivation for the user and what's the friction level on the sort of the share flow. Also for the recipient, right? Is it easy for the user to share or to send an invite? I'm kind of combining the two in this graph. But also, is it like is it easy for the recipient to also then kind of action that get to the music that's being shared or get to the get into the app that they've been invited to and set up an account, and who wins from that with the incentive? Like with Uber, I think I get a discount if you install via my code. Maybe you also get a discount on your first ride. I'm not sure exactly, but you can also think about this. It's just useful to think about it in terms of, is it a self-interest or is it kind of more of a community interest? Like if I'm sharing music, it's more about I want other people to enjoy it. If I'm sharing an Uber invite, it's probably because I want at least me and possibly them to get a discount. And yeah, so just I mentioned friction and making it as easy as possible. Like one great way to keep it like low friction is deferred deep linking, which has become more tricky. But I understand Branch, it still works, which is great. Because I think some of the other implementations that I've seen have broken lately with some of the changes in iOS. So deferred deep linking, basically, just for those who don't know, it's basically passing some parameters through into the first session of the app. So you can have a referral code or something like this, and basically even if somebody doesn't have the app installed, they can install it when they launch the app. You can kind of pick up with the information from the link that they clicked on.
Right, really quick recap before we take any questions. So I think we've gone through these. I'm not going to read throughout this because it's just be reading for the sake of reading. I think it's hopefully some useful tips and hints that we've taken you some real-world examples. We do have a copy of the slide. There's a QR code at the end which will give you access to these slides. Just small correction there. Actually, the QR codes we've got at the end. No, you added another one. We've added something in after that. Okay, great. There's 3 QR codes. There's two LinkedIn QR codes and the slides QR code. QR codes in 2022, 2023 is looking. They're making a comeback. Yeah. Very much from Branch side, it's very much how do you unlock that ROI. You have to measure it. As Andy said, you have to get people to the right place at the right time as well. It's that 3-second economy, making sure that actually, if someone's trying to get somewhere, make it easy for them. Otherwise, there'll be a huge drop-off. And that's my face and Andy's face again. Where's the third QR code? Is it on the next slide? It's on the next slide. Aha. So if you want to meet us, these are who we are. Yeah, this is us.